Have you ever felt like something was off in the way people treat you, but you couldn't quite explain it? They done it insult you, they done it yell, they just pause, watch, wait, and you react. Every time. Maybe it starts with a question laced in sweetness but loaded with implication. Why are you always so sensitive? Are you sure you not overreacting? I was just joking. Then test your limits silently. Not to understand you, but to see how much control they still have. And the truth? You keep failing the test. Not because you weak, not because you naive, but because you still trying to be good in a game that rewards emotional invisibility. Schopenhauer said, "The will of others becomes our master the moment we ignore our own." And perhaps that's why you feel like you're constantly losing pieces of yourself in every conversation, every smile, "It's fine," you whisper, while something in you screams. The most dangerous form of manipulation is not the one that breaks you. It's the one that slowly bends you until you no longer recognize your own shape. You give more than you're asked. You stay longer than you should. You say yes when your entire body is begging to say no. And they know it. They watch how you flinch at silence, how you rush to explain yourself when no one asked for clarity, how easily you thrown off balance by a single look of disapproval. That's the test, not of your strength, but of your boundaries. And every time you choose peace over truth, harmony over dignity, silence over self, you pass the test, but not in the way you think. You pass it by proving you're still controllable. This isn't about blaming you. It's about showing you the rules of a game you didn't even know you were playing. Because the only way out is to stop playing altogether. People don't always control you with force. They control you with omission, with tone, with withdrawal. They plant a doubt, and you water it. They step back, and you move closer. They raise an eyebrow, and you rewrite your whole truth just to seem less dramatic. Am I the problem? Yet maybe I misunderstood. They're just tired. I should be more understanding. And so, piece by piece, you edit yourself down to someone more digestible. That is the manipulation. Not the command, but the suggestion. Not the scream, but the pause. Schopenhauer believed that the will is a blind, irrational force, and when we do not become aware of our own, we become prey to the stronger wills of others. And most of the time, we surrender not to cruelty, but to subtlety. Not to a prison made of bars, but to a prison made of sighs, glances, and unspoken disappointment. There is nothing louder than a silence that expects you to apologize. Nothing more violent than a smile hiding a trap. Nothing more suffocating than the need to be loved by someone who only respects your obedience. You are not failing because you were weak. You were failing because you were still hoping to be seen inside a mirror designed to lie to you. And until you smash that mirror, you will keep fixing the reflection instead of freeing the one trapped behind the glass. You weren't born manipulable. You were trained. Every time you were told, "Don't make a scene," when someone crossed a line. Every time you heard to be the bigger person, even when you were the one bleeding. Every time your anger was labeled irrational, your sadness dramatic, your silence rude. That's when the training began. And so, without realizing it, you developed a nervous system that flinches at disapproval, that rushes to repair tension, even when you didn't cause it. You became the peacemaker, not because peace is your nature, but because conflict became too dangerous. You started to read the room like a battlefield. You learned to anticipate needs, adjust tone, shrink desires, not because it made you happy, because it made you safe. Or at least, that's what you thought. But here's the cruel truth. Manipulators thrive where there is fear of rejection. They don't need to raise their voice. They just need to know that you can't stand the idea of someone being disappointed in you. And that's all it takes. A well-timed silence. a look of mild disapproval, a withdrawal of warmth, and suddenly you're over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-giving. They don't push. You offer. They don't demand. You anticipate. Because deep down, you believe love must be earned, even at the cost of your self-respect. But what if that belief is the lie that keeps you trapped? Schopenhauer warned of the tyranny of the will, not as brute force, but as subtle domination. When one person's unspoken needs become the compass of your behavior, you are no longer free. You've become an extension of their desire. And here's where it gets darker. They don't always know they're doing it. Manipulation can be unconscious, but your suffering? That's always real. So ask yourself, when did you start apologizing for your presence? When did you become more comfortable being understood, less just to be rejected, less often? That's not kindness. That's self-erasure. And the ones who benefit from it are never the ones who truly care. Manipulation is not always built through force. Sometimes it's an agreement you didn't know you signed, an unspoken contract written in your childhood, a contract that says, if I stay quiet, I'll be loved. If I never get angry, they'll keep me around. If I make myself useful enough, I won't be left. These contracts are old, ancient, written not in ink, but in emotional survival. And now, as an adult, you live by them without realizing it. You attract people who don't say what they feel, but expect you to guess. You stay in relationships where affection is conditional, performance-based. You tolerate manipulation disguised as affection because it feels familiar, not good, not right, just known. And the known feels safer than the unknown, even if the known is eating you alive. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is why you keep meeting the same type of person, not because you're cursed, but because you're still operating under an ancient emotional logic. If I just love them hard enough, they'll stop hurting me. But they won't, because they don't need to stop. You never asked them to. You learn to negotiate with pain, to endure it, to rationalize it, to spiritualize it, but not to say, enough, because that word, that boundary, was never part of the script you were given. You were taught to stay, to fix, to understand their side, even when they never asked about yours. And that's the essence of silent manipulation. You doing all the work to maintain a connection they keep poisoning. And when you finally collapse from the weight of it, they say you're too sensitive, too intense, too much. But the truth is brutal. They've never had to carry you, because you never let them. You've been carrying both, their moods, their silence, their expectations, and your soul is breaking under the weight of it. It's not your job to hold what someone else won't even name, and the moment you realize that is the moment the contract begins to burn. Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality," but he also believed that true compassion must begin with the self. You cannot claim to be moral while betraying yourself in the name of others. You cannot call it love if you're the only one bleeding for it, and you cannot call it peace if it costs you your voice. This is the paradox. The more you give in hopes of being loved, the less you are respected. Because in the eyes of those who manipulate, generosity without boundaries looks like weakness. Schopenhauer saw human relationships not as partnerships of mutual care, but as territories of will. Your drive, your energy, your essence is either yours to command or it is co-opted by others. And when you're still trying to please, still trying to be understood, still hoping they'll change if you just communicate better, you've already surrendered your will. You've made them the center of your emotional universe. And that's all a manipulator needs, your orbit. Carl Jung took it further. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because when you do, you stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop apologizing, And in that moment, that terrifying silence, something breaks. Their control. Jung also said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And many of them use you to avoid it. Your empathy becomes their distraction. Your need to fix becomes their excuse to never change. Your availability becomes their shelter from responsibility. So what happens when you stop? When you don't reply? When you don't explain? When you don't collapse under their silence? They panic, not because you're wrong, but because you've become unreadable, uncontrollable, free. And this is the moment of fracture, when you no longer respond as expected. The contract is broken, the mirror shattered, the puppet still. Because stillness is the language they can't decode, and that's where your power begins. There comes a moment, quiet, precise, unshakable, when you feel it. This isn't love. This isn't respect. This is emotional dependency dressed as connection. And it's killing you slowly. You thought being nice would protect you. You believed being forgiving made you noble. You convinced yourself that understanding their pain excused their behavior. But now you see what it cost. You traded your dignity for crumbs of approval. And every time you said, it's okay, when it wasn't. Every time you said, I understand, when you were breaking inside. Every time you stayed, hoping they'd change, you weren't being patient. You were being loyal to your own erasure. Because that's what they count on, isn't it? Your silence, your guilt, your fear of being too much. They don't ask for forgiveness, but they receive it anyway. They don't offer clarity, but you keep giving them the benefit of the doubt. They disappear for days, weeks, emotionally or physically. And you wait. You always wait. And then you tell yourself stories. Maybe they're just overwhelmed. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm the difficult one. That's the manipulation. It doesn't scream. It whispers from within. It uses your own voice to keep you caged. And here's the brutal truth. You don't stay because they're too powerful. You stay because you're afraid of what your life would look like without their shadow in it. You've built an identity around being the one who endures, the one who fixes, the one who waits for love to finally become love. But that's not love. That's trauma repetition. And you've been rehearsing the same role for so long, you forgot it was a choice. Schopenhauer said, to desire immortality is to desire the perpetuation of a great mistake. And maybe, just maybe, you've been trying to make something last that was never real to begin with. So now the moment arrives. You're tired, not just physically, spiritually. There's no more you left to offer. And this is when it happens. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with a silence that says, no more. No more explaining. No more shrinking. No more betraying yourself to be enough. Because the one who stays hoping to be chosen has already chosen themselves last. You are not unlovable. You are just too alive for those who feed on absence. And when you stop trying to make them see you, you finally see yourself. There's a type of freedom that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with fireworks. It doesn't scream, I'm done. It arrives in stillness. And it's terrifying. Because you're no longer reacting. You're no longer rushing to clarify. You're no longer asking for bare minimum decency. And those who fed on your availability, they feel the shift instantly. They ask why you're distant, why you're not the same. They accuse you of being cold, harsh, unfair. But you're not being unfair. You're just no longer being used. For the first time, you said no and didn't justify it. You took longer to reply and didn't feel guilty. You didn't defend your silence because now your silence defends you. And suddenly, the dynamic breaks. The one who needed to dominate now feels powerless because you're no longer chasing. You're no longer bleeding, just to keep the peace. Carl Jung wrote, "He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakes." And now you've turned inward. No more bargaining, no more scripts, just awareness. Cold, honest, liberating. You realize that being misunderstood is not a threat, it's a filter. Let them misread you. Let them invent reasons for your withdrawal. Let them call it ego, selfishness, arrogance. You don't owe them clarity, because the people who truly respect you never needed you to explain your boundaries in the first place. You thought you had to fight for respect, but respect was never something to win. It was something to refuse to lose. And you were losing it every time you gave them access to your heart without asking if they had the hands to hold it. Now you've reclaimed it, not by winning an argument, but by walking away from it entirely. Not by convincing them to treat you better, but by no longer standing where you're treated worse. That's the hidden liberation. You don't escape manipulation by confronting it. You escape by no longer needing its illusion of safety. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you finally become unreadable, untouchable, free. Now we close the circle. The puppet is still there, but now the strings hang loose, not cut by rage, not snapped in rebellion, released, quietly, by choice, because something in you stopped flinching. You stopped apologizing for your tension. You stopped negotiating with ghosts. You stopped mistaking disrespect for complexity. And in that space, the space where you would have once begged, over-explained, compromised, there is now a silence so heavy it unsettles those who once pulled your strings. You are no longer predictable, no longer emotionally rentable, no longer a mirror reflecting what they needed to see, because you've broken their favorite mirror, the version of you that needed their validation to exist. The fog has lifted, and what you see now is you, raw, clear, whole. Schopenhauer said, "It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else." And maybe that's the real reason they tried to keep you confused. Because your clarity disrupts their illusion. Your refusal to react ruins the script. You were never too much. You were simply surrounded by those who fed on your absence. But now, you're present, not loud, not defensive, just unmoved. And that presence? That's the one thing no manipulator can stand, a person they can no longer control. So I leave you here at the edge of a question, not to answer it, but to let it echo. How many of your yeses were actually cries for peace? And how much of your silence was a scream no one heard, not even you? If you truly saw the strings, would you cut them? Or would you reach for them again? Because being played still feels safer than being alone.